Hey everyone, my name is Kayla Morton. I'm the sports editor at the East Carolinian. Welcome to the fall version of TECSperts for East Carolina's football team. This is Aaron Jackson. He's the football editor for the East Carolinian and a beat writer for football. This is Tyler Gavin, and he is the other football beat writer this semester. Hello everyone, welcome to this week's edition of TECSperts. We'll be recapping ECU's first win in Dowdy-Ficklin Stadium against BYU 2 weeks ago, going over their bye week and previewing for their upcoming matchup away at Houston this weekend. So guys, we finally got our first win in Dowdy-Ficklin Stadium against BYU for homecoming. What were some of the positives that came out of that game?
Well, ECU finally stepped up. The defense stepped up and the offense stepped up. The offense stepped up, was able to produce points and yards against the BYU Cougars defense. And the defense stepped up by allowing the Cougars to only score 17 points the whole game and forcing one turnover.
I think the most underrated aspect was that the fans actually showed up again. After not being there for games like USF and Temple, it was homecoming and everyone showed up and it was loud in there. And for ECU to be able to stop a pretty bad team in BYU and then be able to move the ball, there were definitely signs of life.
It definitely gave them confidence going forward, even if it wasn't a good team to beat. But it's definitely finally someone that ECU should have beaten, just like they couldn't do against Temple, so they finally got a little bit together. So then over this past weekend, they did go into a bye week. How did that bye help the injuries for the players on the teams?
I think for ECU it helped Thomas Sirk the most because they need him at quarterback in order for the offense to get going. They need his rushing capability so that the running backs can get open and get in the holes, and they can even block two for him on passing plays.
Yeah. It also helped Tim Irvin. Coach Montgomery said he'll be back this week. Unfortunately, Corey Sargent and Keontae Anderson are both still out. But I think it helped their mentality most because now they got to assess the challenge ahead, that they have to win all 4 games to reach bowl eligibility. And I think this week they got to kind of game plan around that.
Corn Wiggins also did move ahead in his concussion protocol and looks to play this weekend. So what do you think was the main focus in practice? What were the notable things they needed to still work on during their bye week that allowed them to do that?
Well, from what I think the defensive line needs to work on getting a little bit more pressure onto the quarterback on the opposing team. The secondary needs to tighten up a little bit. The addition of Corey Wiggins coming back to the lineup is going to be a big help, and Bobby Fulp is still a little banged up, but he's still there and blocking on offense. That needs to improve.
This was a huge week because they got to finally prepare for D'Eriq King. Coach Montgomery admitted on Monday that last week they weren't preparing for him because he mostly played wide receiver to that point. But after coming in and having a great game against USF, the Pirate defense got to game plan around another mobile quarterback after Quentin Flowers just dominated USF.
So D'Eriq King is slated to start for Houston this weekend. At the beginning of the season, he was the running back and wide receiver listed on their depth chart. But he led a comeback victory against previously undefeated and number 17th ranked the University of South Florida. And because he led that comeback, he's going to start this weekend. How does ECU transition? How does Houston continue to move forward with somebody who they didn't think was going to be a quarterback going forward in their games?
Well, I think ECU is going to have a kind of bit of problem because they've had to face a lot of mobile quarterbacks this season, and we've only won one of those games, and that was against Connecticut, where we almost gave it up. So now that we know who's going to be at quarterback, which is King, they have to game plan towards him, and he's going to run the ball before he beats the coverage. So.
Yeah, he only threw for about 120 yards in that win, which is why I think that they're still going to look for Kyle Posma, their senior quarterback, who they rode with to this point, to still play. I think a big aspect was the rain in the USF game that they had to start running the ball like ECU used to do with James Summers.
So talking about James Summers, do you think the players who were on the team when Summers was on the roster will kind of have a better idea how to prepare when they play in this game against King, or do you think it's not related?
No, absolutely. I think that's going to be a big help. They got to practice against him for years. A player like Aaron Ramser, who I talked to yesterday after the defensive practice, wasn't on the team, but they said that they've been preparing because they'd seen players like Will Greer and Quentin Flowers and mobile quarterbacks like that.
So besides King, who are some of the other notable offensive or defensive players for Houston?
Well, definitely on offense, Mulbar Carr, running back, and Duke Catalan, who's also another running back. Them two have combined for about 5 touchdowns and about 700 yards this year. And last game, Duke Catalan didn't really do anything, and it was all the Mulbar car show. So if both of them in their backfield, expect something to happen.
And then they also got a 6'2", 6'3" wide receiver on the edge in Linnell Bonner, and he's been super effective for them on offense. And then on defense, they have 5-star recruit. He's a sophomore now in Ed Oliver, who's just been a beast since he showed up there.
So is there any, I guess, weak part that we can diagnose on Houston's team that ECU can expose if they get the chance to?
Well, what I saw in the game I watched between Houston and Memphis was they got up early soon, and then they weren't able to hold that lead, and then they ended up losing that game against Memphis. So if ECU can rattle Houston, get them a little out of their place, maybe they can pull off a lucky victory.
I agree with that. I think, going back to what Aaron said, the defensive line and the offensive line both have to be more physical than Houston's are. Houston, this could be a trap game for Houston. Coming off a huge upset win, they go into a bye week next week, and ECU's been really good historically coming off the byes. I think they're 7-2 in their last 9. So I think that they can win the physicality battle. They can put up more points and play from ahead.
Gotcha. Josh Jones is ruled out on the offensive line for Houston already, so if ECU can get around their backups, who they haven't even named a backup yet because they lack in that department on the depth chart, if ECU can bring that pressure, they can also expose and get pressure to the quarterback. So if Houston were to be down at any point in this game, why would that be?
It would definitely be because the defense stepped up, because the offense is going to run into a few problems with Houston, but I think overall when the offense sees the defense making plays and getting third down stops, they're going to want to go and put points on the board. So it all starts with the defense.
Again, I think you touched on it. Third down conversions are going to be the biggest part of this game. ECU's been historically bad, ranking last in third down stops and second to last in third down conversions, while Houston is second in third down stops, stopping around almost 70% of offenses, and they're fourth in conversions. So I think if ECU can turn around everything that they've done on third down and actually start converting and maybe hold Houston, they can play from ahead.
It almost seems like ECU does better on fourth downs when they're forced to go for it than third downs. So the defense for Houston has picked off quarterbacks 10 times this season. Will Sirk struggle with interceptions in this game, or will his offensive receivers kind of already click with him?
Well, I think Thomas Sirk might finally get Jimmy Williams back into the game, and I think they will focus more on Grayson, but he needs to be aware of where the defensive backs and the corners are, because he does tend to get careless late in games when he throws the ball up. But as long as he's aware of what's going on and which person he wants to go to, and he's doing the right checks, I think he should have an okay day.
Yeah, the passing game can be effective if they don't have to rely on it so much. If the running backs, which running back, no one can guess at this point, finally gets to some production, then they are able to run the ball, which opens up the play action passes.
So moving on to score predictions, all of us do pick Houston winning this game. I have the score at 55-27, the highest points for Houston this weekend. I just think the way Houston has exposed good or fair defenses this season and scored a lot of points on them is going to prove ECU vulnerable, because their defense just isn't good, and they will give up conversions either on first, second, third, or even fourth down if they're forced to do it, and they're going to run up the score against ECU. Tyler has 38-23, the least amount of points scored for Houston. Why is that?
I think Houston's going to be trying to test things out. They got the quarterback problems with D'Eriq King coming in now. They don't really know what they have in the sophomore. They have Josh Allen, who's a junior, who's 3-0 in his 3 starts, but he's been injured. And then they have the senior Kyle Posma, who can also play. So I think they're going to be trying to test a lot of things out. And once they get ahead, they might be trying to switch up some things and show some different schemes that they can practice going into the bye week.
And Aaron, you have 44-26 Houston. Why is that?
I just believe that it's going to be a typical game for ECU. They will hop out early, and they might even lead early, but towards the end, Houston's going to run away with it. And I think they'll only lead early because Houston will kind of underestimate ECU coming into the game because of our record. And they're going into a bye, and they think, oh, we just beat USF ranked team, so we could easily handle ECU. And that underestimation might be their reason why they lose. But I got Houston.
I think it's going to be an 11 o'clock start local time for ECU. It's a 12 o'clock. They're going to be an hour ahead. They're going to Texas, so it's an hour behind or whatever it is. So I think that might be a huge problem for the ECU if they can wake up, if they can get used to playing that hour early.
And thankfully, they have had a fair amount of noon games not like
Mhm.
they're going back and forth between night
Exactly.
and day, so that could help them. But that concludes this week's episode of TECSperts. Join us next week when we recap the game against Houston.